Hey guys, welcome back. So today I brought home this 6300 watt Craftsman generator. This one was sold to me by a flipper. He found this one curbside, so he threw it in the back of his truck, brought it home, and once there he tried to start it unsuccessfully. So he pulled the carb, cleaned it up, put it back on, but still no joy. And it was at that point he realized this is one of the rare Briggs that actually has an oil sensor, and it was low on oil, so he topped it off and it started right up. But at that point he realized this engine has an issue, and that issue is that it's smoking. Now, instead of dealing with the problem, he just listed it for sale, 80 bucks, which is a steal. I mean, around here, usually 100 bucks, the cheapest I can get these for, and those usually have a blown engine or a bad stator, and this one has neither. So I'd say we're way ahead of the game. Now, as far as why it's smoking, it's a pretty short list. It's either a carburation issue, an oil issue, a blown head gasket, or something to do with the piston, rings, and or cylinder. But, when I went to go get it, I did have them start it, and I could tell from the smell it was definitely burning oil. So I think we can safely eliminate the carburetor as the issue. So I'm going to get you set up a little bit better. I want to check that oil. We'll probably pull the spark plug and check the air filter and see if that gives us any clues as to what's going on here. Yeah, the oil's pretty clean actually, and I don't smell any fuel in it. Yeah, I've seen worse, but there is some buildup on it. It's not too bad. I cleaned the plug up a bit, but for an engine that's burning oil, I would have expected it to look a bit worse. I mean, regardless, the plug works. I'm going to put it back in for now. I do want to get this outside and test with it. So I was looking for a couple things in here. I guess first I wanted to see that it had filters, and it does. Also, the breather comes in right here, and I wanted to see if there was oil coming up in here, and there's not. So, at this point, we've eliminated a couple possibilities, the oil being one of them, and based on me running it when I went to go buy it, based on the smell, the carburetor is pretty much ruled out. Now, one other thing I can do right here is actually just pull the recoil slowly until I get to the compression stroke. And what I want to see is that it builds pressure and it doesn't leak out quickly. I mean, there's always some leak down, but, if it doesn't leak out quickly, then that tells me that the compression ring is good. And most likely that means the cylinder is good. And it also tells me that the head gasket most likely is not the issue. Okay, good. The leak down, I'd say, is minimal on this engine. So I don't think we have a blown head gasket. The compression ring is still working, which tells me the cylinder probably isn't in that bad a shape. It is most likely the oil scraper ring. So I'm going to get the airbox back on. I want to bring it outside, run it as is to kind of show you what's going on. I also want to test the power output. I haven't done that yet, and also load it up and just see if we're down at all on horsepower. Okay, ready to give this thing a try. Now I did unplug the breather. I want to see how much blow-by there is once this thing is running, and we'll load it up, let it run for a bit, and just see how bad the smoke gets out of that exhaust. Under 21.3 volts and 63.2 hertz. We're at 60.2 hertz, 115.8 volts. This one's interesting. I mean, it started right up. It sounds pretty good. You know, the engine speed unloaded was about 62.8 hertz. And under a 3,000 watt load, it settled a little bit above 60 hertz. So horsepower-wise, I think we're doing pretty good. As far as the smoking goes, it smokes more when the engine isn't loaded. Under a 3,000 watt load, that smoke almost goes away. And then I turned the load off and the smoke came back. Now, something I forgot to do, which I want to try, is to start it again and actually slow the engine down, see if the smoking gets better or worse. And also I noticed this vent here didn't seem to be venting. I mean, I didn't feel any pulse of air coming out of it. I mean, as far as I can tell, it's not clogged, but maybe there is something going on here. So I'm going to start it one more time, just slow the engine down, see what that does to the smoking. And then I probably want to pull this valve cover off and just take a closer look to see if there's anything going on in there. So I do find it quite odd, the lack of a pulse coming out of here. And that definitely could be causing this issue. So I'm going to get the valve cover off out here, take a quick look what's going on. Yeah, it seems fine. Yeah, it's definitely no blockage in the tube. And I don't see anything going on the cover itself. So I do find it odd, the lack of crankcase pulse coming out of here. So I've been thinking about this one as far as why we're not getting a good pulse out of that breather tube. I mean, there's almost none to speak of. And the tube itself is not blocked. The valve cover where the tube connects, there's no issues with that. So something else is going on here. And I know earlier I pretty much ruled out the head gasket, but now I'm thinking the issue might be with the head gasket. There is an extra hole on this head gasket. This is from a similar engine, and the bolts don't go through that hole. That actually goes right into the block and then up into the valve area. And that is where the pulse from the engine comes up. So when the piston's going down into the block, it creates a high pressure. So it's going to pulse air up into the top end. And similar, when the piston's coming up, the opposite's going to happen. So we're not getting that pulse. So my best guess is maybe the head gasket is blown somewhere in this area. And if it's blown heading over toward the piston in the cylinder, then what that's going to do is the pulse coming up is going to actually blow into the cylinder. So we're not going to get a pulse coming out, and actually oil is going to be coming as well. So I'm thinking it's blown somewhere in this area. I could be wrong on that. I'd say the other possibility is down here. This is where the push rods go down into the engine. And if it's blown here, you could also get oil coming in and some of that pressure as well being kind of recirculated into the combustion area. So I don't know if either of these is correct, but I'm thinking we need to pull the head next. So I'm going to get the tank off, the battery disconnected, and in order to free the head up, I need to pull the carb, the blower housing, and the exhaust, and then finally we can get that head off the engine. So that's the passage I was talking about that basically allows the engine to breathe up into the valves and then out the breather tube. And you can see the gasket does look like it's blown. It's bubbled up here. So I'm guessing once I peel this off, we'll see the damage underneath. That basically tunnels from here on over into the cylinder. It actually looks pretty good on the back side. So it doesn't look bad, but I think this is where the oil was coming from. Yeah, so I guess that's conclusive. You know, I wish I could see more of a like burn marks where it actually burned away the head gasket. But if you look at the rest of it, you know, there's nothing else, no other tunneling going on like what happened here. So hopefully that's it. I am going to order a new head gasket. We'll give that a try first before going any further with this. And the cylinder itself looks to be in pretty good shape. So there's an up close look at the head itself. Honestly, it's not that bad considering how much it was smoking. So the blown head gasket, I think, was a fairly recent event. Anyway, I'm going to soak this a bit in PB Blaster. It helps break up some of the carbon. Then we'll get the valves out and clean everything up. So I let this sit for about 3 hours, and most of the PB Blaster leaked out. I guess starting with the intake, it looks fairly dry. And then we got the exhaust, and I'd say that's where it all leaked out. So the valves need to be lapped. I was going to lap them anyway, so I'm going to take a minute, just clean some of the carbon off here before getting the valves out. I'll probably clean this surface as well. Get the valves cleaned up and then lap them in and put it back together. So I'm going to use this stainless brush to clean out this area here. They do tend to lose bristles, so you want to be careful, I guess, when you're done. Make sure you clean everything up well. You also don't want to hit any of the sealing surface on the head. It's really just this area I'm going to focus in on. All right, that's all I want to do for now. probably got about 80% of the carbon off. And really, this doesn't have to be perfect, but you do want to get all the chunks out of here. So next, I'm going to pull these valves off. I'm going to clean and decarbon those. Then we'll, I guess, do another round here just to get the rest of this carbon. We'll lap these in, clean the mating surface up, and do the same to the block, and then we'll be ready for reassembly once the head gasket arrives. And I'm going to get the rockers out of the way. Makes it a lot easier to get the springs out. Yeah, it's no surprise. It was leaking. There's a lot of carbon there on the exhaust. Anyway, I'm going to use some Scotch-Brite. I'm going to spin this in a drill and just try to knock a lot of that off. So the intake cleaned up really well in less than a minute. So intake's usually not the issue. It's the exhaust that carbons up real bad. And I've been working at this one for quite a while. You can see there is still a fine layer of carbon on it. But, for what we're trying to do, this should be fine. So I'm going to finish cleaning the head. We'll lap these in, and then we can start putting it back together. I am second guessing my diagnosis a bit. The part of the head gasket that looked suspicious is the part here that bridges this breather over to the combustion area. And some of that stuck to the top of the head. So what I was looking at before, it may not have been blown. It may have been a result of just getting the head off the engine. It just seems oddly suspicious that this is where it chose to stick. Anyway, we'll finish this up. This has to be done anyway. We'll give it a try just with the new head gasket and see if that solves the issue. Yeah, they both came out pretty well. That's the intake there, and this was the worst of the two. The exhaust. Got a good line going around. I think we'll be good. All right, the new gasket's here, so I'm going to get this back together enough to get it outside and give it a test. Well, I wouldn't say this new gasket is very good. It's been folded there and there, so I'm not going to use this. I'm going to order another. And to that effect, I actually ordered two just in case this didn't solve the problem. I would need another one at some point, but even the other one doesn't look so hot. So I'm going to return both of these. Unfortunately, this is going to have to wait. Okay, let's try this again. And there is a torquing pattern on this. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so I'm just a touch past top dead center. The valves on this are both set the same between 4 and 5 thousandths. This is the 5 thousandths here, and the exhaust actually feels pretty good. It feels right around 5, and the 6 is tight. So I'm going to leave that alone. The intake, it's loose at 5, and it's pretty loose at 6. So this has to be tightened up a bit. All right, that's pretty good. We're somewhere between a 4 and a 5. All right, and that's it for now. I did add the breather tube as well as the ignition switch, but there really is no point to finishing this thing up. I mean, what I saw in the head gasket, I'd say at best was inconclusive. This might still smoke. And if that's the case, then this whole thing has to be torn down and the oil ring replaced. But let's get it outside. It is going to smoke for a bit. I'm sure the exhaust is full of oil, but hopefully it burns off. Okay, the moment of truth. Let's see if the smoke burns off after a minute. Okay, I had to shut it down. I'm running low on fuel. I did let it run for about 8 minutes, and I'm not quite sure how I feel about this. I'd say I saw no difference for about the first 3 minutes, and then it definitely seemed to be getting a lot better. And in fact, most of the smoke I saw coming at the end actually seemed to be burning off more on the outside of the exhaust than anywhere else. So I'm going to refuel, run this probably for another 10 minutes, and see how it does. Okay, all refueled. I let this cool down for about 20 minutes, so let's start it back up and see what it does. All right, so I just ran it for another 8 minutes, and all I can say is I'm glad I didn't put this thing fully back together. I think the head gasket having that bubble where it was just a coincidence and not the underlying problem. I think we're most likely dealing with, a worn out oil scraper ring or possibly the cylinder itself. So I need to get this back inside, break it down to where it was, and then keep going all the way. All right, back here again. It actually didn't take too long, probably about a little less than 30 minutes to get to where we were before. And, I was just double checking a few things. Before putting this together, I did validate that this port going down into the block wasn't clogged. And it wasn't. There's also a corresponding hole on the back of the head, and that is not blocked either. But what I just discovered is that inside this valve cover, there's actually like a check valve. It only lets air out, but not back in. And I think that's why I wasn't feeling the pulse there, and I think that kind of got me going on the wrong track, especially when I saw the way that Gasket looked in this area. But I think that was just from me removing the head that did that damage. So anyway, I used this time to get the oil out of the block, and I want to get the power head off next. But before I can do that, I need access to the stator bolts that hold the feet down onto this rail. And this block of wood that's serving as the foot is in my way. So I'm going to get that off. I do have another foot, which I think is the right part. So I'll put that on, and then we'll proceed with kind of disconnecting some of these wires and getting the stator rotor off, and then move on to the engine. It's a pretty nice setup. I wasn't expecting to see this. Usually these power heads just have a bridge rectifier on the brushes and that's it. And that basically means the voltage is proportional to the engine speed. But in this case, there is an AVR. And that explains actually why the voltage seemed pretty normal. I think when testing this initially, I was kind of surprised that the voltage was around 120 volts. Given the engine speed, usually without an AVR, you'd see closer to 130 volts. So besides that, it also has a bridge rectifier to supply DC to the battery charging circuit. So most of this we can leave alone. I think the only thing that has to be disconnected here is this blue wire, which leads over to the battery. Okay, and also the brushes have to be removed or they will break when you pull it out. Now, as far as the wire color, you do want to take note. The white wire, the negative, I believe, is in the front, and the black is in the back. And you can tell this black wire actually got pretty mangled right there. It looks like it got sandwiched between the cover and the screw. You know, I don't see any wire poking through the insulation yet, but yeah, we'll have to probably tape that up a bit and just make sure that's out of the way when reassembling. And second thought, I am going to remove the AVR as well as this connector here. I'm going to need to get a puller in here to push that bearing out. So in order to get this rotor off, I need to put threads on here. These Briggs rotors usually don't have threads, and this one's no exception. So I'm going to use an M12 1.75 to put at least 8 full turns of threads on. Okay, now we need a rod to basically push against the crankshaft to pop the rotor off. And I have a bunch here. They are 3/8 inch, I believe, and they've been previously cut for other projects. So I'm going to use the bolt that was holding the rotor on just to get a measurement of how long it is before it hits the crank. And you want to select a rod that is about 1/3 of an inch less than the location I marked with my thumb. And in this case, this one should work. I've already started cracking loose the bolts that hold the bell housing on, and these can be difficult. They are Loctited in, and there is a lot of flex when trying to break those free. And even once they start turning, they fight pretty much the whole way out. So I'm surprised I haven't broken one yet. Hopefully today won't be the day. But once you get them out, you do need to clean the threads, both on the bolt as well as chase the threads in the hole. Okay, this is actually the first one I've ever opened that hasn't run out of oil. It's not too bad. Journal looks decent. Yeah, I don't even have to measure that. That end gap looks fine. You know, Briggs says anywhere between 8 and 30 thousandths is standard spec, and I'd say that's about 12 thousandths. So the plot thickens. So here's a close-up look at the bottom part of the cylinder. And this I think is where the issue is. You can see there is some scoring. Most of it can't be felt, but down here, this line and then these two, they can be felt a bit, and that might be enough to let the oil through, causing the smoke. So I'd say there's no real smoking gun on this, just a smoking engine. You know, I took an up-close look at the ring on the outside just to see if there's any defects, and I couldn't find any. I think the only thing that was a little bit suspicious was that when using the ring expander tool to get this off, the ring kind of expanded unevenly. So potentially the engine has been overheated and the tension on that ring might be wrong. You know, I also measured up the bore and there's minimal wear. I'd say less than half a thousandth. So there's plenty of meat left in there. And you know, as far as how to fix this, I mean, there's a bunch of ways to go about it. You know, I could just buy a new block, but it's actually discontinued. And even if it wasn't, it's cost prohibitive. It would probably cost more than that generator is worth. Another option is to get the cylinder honed to 20 thousandths over, buy an oversized piston. But again, cost is a big factor there. So those two options really are not options. And there's three other options. One is I just pitch this in the trash and forget about it. But this is a running engine, and I don't want to do that. I could just put it back together, sell it as is, but since it's apart, I think I can do quite a bit to minimize what's going on just by getting a new set of rings, hone that cylinder, which will take a lot of the imperfections out, not all. It still will consume probably more oil than it should, but I don't think it'll smoke, and there is a low oil sensor on this. So that is really the only viable option, at least in my mind. So that's what I'm going to go with. This video, it's getting quite long, and we've got a long ways to go. So I'm going to cut it here. We'll pick up on this next week where I left off, and hopefully get this thing outside and running without any smoke. So I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.